What's up, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall market. I want to break down some big news that came out that helped Tesla explode today, and whether or not Tesla's going to likely see a lot more upside looking at what technicals are suggesting. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so make sure you take nothing I'm saying as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. Moomoo is an amazing global brokerage account that consists of many exclusive offers. If you sign up and deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. Deposits $2,000, you're guaranteed 25 in total. And deposit $5,000, you're guaranteed 60 free stocks. The offer ends on June 3rd. You'll also qualify for an 8.1% APY in uninvested cash. So please check out my offer down below. Anyways, let's talk about what's happening with Tesla. As of right now, Tesla got a very, very monstrous bounce. The first thing I want to mention is that when you go back on the charts, like we've talked about before, we had this quadruple bottom that formed. And then you also could see that Tesla was trying to base on April 21st at that 222 area. Now, we got a very, very nice rebound, and then we formed a flag. So that's a very, very good sign so far for Tesla to attempt to continue to go higher. But I do have some concerns as we're getting some mixed signals about this pump, which does make me very, very open-minded for two different things. So honestly, guys, Tesla pumped on some news about how there's going to be trade talks with China, and also because of some comments from President Trump. That's part of why Tesla pumped, because keep in mind, China is a very, very big market for Tesla. And then secondly, another big factor in why, this is pushing the way it is because of a lot of optimism with what's been said about the share price. So my concern about Tesla is the fact that we have a bearish divergence looking at the MACD and the RSI, and we need to hold above 300 to continue. We need to hold 300 to push back up to the 310 area. If we push and can't hold above 300, then I do think this might actually pull back a little bit and retest like 292 or so. But then we need to see if this can make a higher low again and then try to bounce again like that. So I'll be watching to see which way we end up going. But I'll go over more details in just a second. I want to talk about some news first. We had a lot of news that came out that was very important. So the first thing that's worth mentioning is the fact that with Tesla moving the way it is, despite the fact that the Chinese made sales went down, there was a big piece of news that came out involving China, and that's part of why we saw the share price up quite a bit. The first piece of news is the fact that there's a lot of optimism with the robo-taxi launch, because we're going to be looking at the Treasury Secretary who's going to be going to Switzerland during this weekend to have trade talks with his Chinese counterparts. That's some big news, and that could actually help us push more. China is very critical for Tesla when it comes to production, and it's also the largest and the most profitable parts of Tesla's production factories. So please keep that in mind. So we'll have to see what happens if we get some kind of trade negotiations or if we see a decrease in any tariffs. What helped Tesla was this news right here. President Trump said that he is willing to cut the US's 145% tariff on China from that to 80%. So he wants to basically or almost cut it in half, going from 145 to about 80%. That's almost half of what it would previously be. Obviously, it depends on the product. Not everything is charged at 145%, but there are a lot of products that are charged that way. And President Trump is willing to cut the tariffs. So that's what he's saying. And that's some very, very bullish news. That is part of why Tesla saw a push alongside some trade negotiations. What else is good for Tesla is the fact that the Chinese central banks 2 days ago, they have cut their interest rates, and then they're also going to be stimulating their economy more with more stimulus. That is good, at least for the Chinese economy amidst what's going on. That's part of why we also saw this push. So that's what's really benefiting Tesla, at least so far. Tesla does depend on the Chinese market to a large extent. A lot of their sales do come from there. And then their gigafactories where they produce a lot of their products, it also depends a lot on that. So that's why this Chinese news is very impactful for them. Now, there's been some good news and bad news coming out from President Trump. The good news is that President Trump is insisting there's going to be a fair deal with China. He's willing to decrease the tariffs on China to 80%. He's also negotiating with India, as India has offered to slash its tariff gap by 2/3. That is some good news. On top of this, we're awaiting another potential deal between the US and China. We're going to see how things end up going. Right now, there's some optimism, but we did see the market slow down a little bit because of this news. President Trump did say that he wants the 10% baseline on tariffs on nearly all countries to stay. He says this amidst the fact that we had the UK and US trade deal, and the baseline tariff remained despite the fact that the auto tariffs came down. So that's a very, very big piece of news. And then President Trump is also talking about how he might be increasing some tariffs on pharmaceuticals and textiles. So that's another big piece of news. So The good news is that there's trade deals potentially coming. There's negotiations with China, and President Trump is willing to decrease the tariffs on China. That's bullish. But the bad news is that, or at least I would say like the not so good news for the markets is that President Trump is saying that he wants to keep the 10% tariffs, the baseline tariffs on all countries to incentivize US companies to build more in the US and sway away from kind of like sourcing in other countries. And then simultaneously, he's also saying he's willing to increase some tariffs on pharmaceuticals and other products. So, not the best of news. So, very, very mixed news so far, but Tesla is still holding up very nicely. When it comes to what's happening on our economic calendar and such, Mondays when we have Kugler giving a speech in minor data, Tuesdays when we have CPI data coming out. On Wednesday, we have Daly from the Fed giving a speech in very minor data. On Thursday, we have PPI data alongside Jerome Powell giving a speech at 8:40 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And finally, Friday, we have the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Report, which may cause more volatility. So that's what we're looking for, at least thus far. When it comes to other pieces of news, we have Monday.com on Monday. On Tuesday, we have JD.com alongside Honda. On Wednesday, we have Sony and a few more. And then on Thursday, on Wednesday, we have Sony, excuse me. Then on Thursday, we have Alibaba and Walmart. So lots of retail. Last but not least, the market is still greedy, but we're going to see if this greed lasts or not, because I do see some red flags about the market rally we're seeing. I do want to talk about that. Momentum's at extreme fear. It should become less fearful as time goes on. The put to call option ratio is dipping as we're seeing more puts being closed. And last but not least, the volatility remains neutral as we're seeing the VIX dipping. So, with that being said, what do I think is going to happen from this point on? Honestly, guys, Tesla is still looking a little bit more bullish, but I am kind of concerned about this 300 area. When you look at the share price, it's very good that we had this low here. We came up and made a higher low to try to push higher. That's very, very good news. But I want to see if we could actually get back above this like 300 and 300 plus area to actually push for 310 plus. If we end up losing the support right over here around this 294 area, we could be dipping back down. There's a slight bearish divergence, so it all depends on what we see over the weekend with the trade talks. If we push to the high and we can't hold 300, we could shuffle and come down a little bit. There might be a little bit of a pullback to 292 or so, but as long as we could base around 290, we could still try to bounce and push higher later on. So keep that in mind. Tesla still has the potential to push for the 310s. If we don't hold 292, we could turn back down lower, but I'm hoping we see a move like this. It depends on the news as well. If we get a trade deal with China or some big updates, that could still help Tesla. So there's always that possibility. So there's a lot of like moving parts right now, but the technicals do suggest we might see a small pullback on Tesla before potentially going higher because of this bearish divergence. So it might pull back a bit before trying to bounce, but I could change my view depending on what we get over the weekend. Now, despite this, I am concerned about something. SPY and the QQQ are losing volume, and we're starting to shuffle a lot. We're also seeing a bearish divergence starting to develop on SPY, which is not the best of signs. So we're bullish, okay? SPY is still making higher highs, higher lows, higher highs, higher lows. We're still technically bullish, but the problem is that we could pivot if we end up losing some key supports. So we have 570 as resistance. If we could break that, I could see us try to go for like 575. That's where this like imbalance happens to be. But then we'll have to see if we could break past that and continue to push. If not, we could be turning back down. My prediction is that this might try to go a bit higher, but then I am going to be very careful around 575 to 580 because once we hit this resistance zone, there's going to be a risk of us returning back down and getting a bit of a pullback because of the bearish divergences, the lack of volume, and the fact that the market's at some tough resistance. And we're very dependent on President Trump and these like tariff news to get more upside. So I do want to tell you that it's a bit of a red flag to me, especially when you look at different confluences looking at the VIX. So we're bullish. We could trend a bit higher, but I'm going to be very careful at that 575 area. We might see a pivot down towards like 550 if that does not hold. So I want to give you guys a warning about that. I will give you guys more updates depending on the news. For the QQQ, we could try to go for 494 to 500. It's possible we go a little bit higher, but also there's a bearish divergence that price is trending upwards. Our indicators are slowing down, and we're seeing volume slowing. So even if we do continue to uptrend and retest like 494 to 500, we could once again continue to uptrend, then get a big pivot back down towards like the 480s. If we get some kind of rejections, you want to be very careful. On the IWM, we're technically bullish as we're making higher lows. But although we could be pushing for like 202 to 205, we're making higher highs and higher lows. And if we end up losing support at 199, we could be dipping back down towards the lower levels. And that's going to be taking us back down. For ES, we are once again showing some weakness. We have this 5750 area as our resistance, so you want to be very careful with that. I do think that it's possible for ES to continue to uptrend like this. It's possible we try to retest 5750. We try to go a little bit higher, but the problem is that there's a divergence, a very bearish divergence. We actually have a triple bearish divergence starting to form. So that's a risk, in my opinion. So if we go higher, great, but I would be careful. We're still technically bullish as of right now, but if we can't hold above that level, then whether we come up here or not, this could start to pivot and eventually start dipping for like the 5500s. I do see a risk of us turning back down. It depends on the news, but I do think that although we might try to go higher, I'd be very careful with this. NQ lacks volume. We also have a triple bearish divergence. It is possible we go a little bit higher. It's possible we try to push towards this high over here around 20,500. 20,400 to 20,500 could be tested, but that's a big if we get some good news. And then even if we hit this resistance, we'll see if we get a pivot back down, if we get some kind of rejection or not. So please keep that in mind. For Bitcoin, we're slowing down towards 100,000. We'll have to see if this bounces or not. I do think we could be retesting 101,000. Yes, Tesla is still outperforming the market. It could be fighting for 300, but there might be a small pullback to 292, and we'll see if we bounce first off of that. It's still technically bullish. Okay, I'm going to make that very, very clear. So watch that 300 area to see if we break. If not, we could be dipping towards 292, and then we'll see if we get some kind of bounce like this. So give it some time. On other tickers such as like Nvda, we're slowing down a bit, so we're looking for essentially this 113 area, and we'll see if we bounce or not. So give it some time. Apple is also showing some strength. We're looking for essentially 201, but we have to see if this breaks out or not. My concern is that the EMA is going to be a tough resistance, and the daily is not looking as good on Apple. It's still showing a little bit of weakness here. So what I anticipate is that it's going to try to go a little higher for like the low 200s, then kind of shuffle. And we have to see, can we bounce, make a higher low here, or is this going to be a rejection move if we make a lower high, right? It could go either way. I'm going to be in the middle with Apple. I do think Nvidia is about, not Nvidia, sorry. Netflix could be dipping a little bit off this double top, could be dipping back down to like the 1000 area. 1080 could be coming on Netflix. Nvidia has a tough resistance here. We might return to like 115. We'll see if we bounce 113 to 115. Might be a little bit of a pullback on there. On AMD, we're also in the middle. We're looking a bit more bullish. As long as we don't lose 100, we're actually looking for an attempt to push for 102. And I do think we consolidate for some time before we see a move down. So 102 could be coming, and then we can trade sideways, and we'll see if we turn from there. For Coinbase, we're in the middle. We have a slight bearish divergence, so please be careful with that. Looking at the 4-hour, it's still showing weakness. It tried to break out only to reject. So it's in the middle. I do see us shuffling for some time like this. Break 206, we're bullish, and lose 191, we're looking for a dip. So it could go either way. Amazon is technically a bit more bullish as we're making higher highs and higher lows. I would like to see us hold this EMA right here and start pushing for essentially 199. For Meta, we're showing weakness. We have to see if we could hold 592. If not, we could be dipping to about 578. So look for 592. If it doesn't hold, I could be looking for a dip to that 570 area. Microsoft is showing some weakness. It might be retesting 433, and we'll see if that holds. If not, we could be dipping to like 424. Google is also slowing down, making a lower high here, so we'll just have to see how this goes. Can we break out more or not? If not, there's going to be a risk of us returning to fill this gap towards like 152, and we'll see if we bounce. I could see us dipping a little bit more, and we'll see if buyers defend us off 152 to 150. For DJT, we're in the middle going back and forth between supply and demand. It might be looking for an attempt for 25.5, and we'll see how that goes. The VIX is technically on a bit of a downtrend. We're actually continuing to make lower highs right now, but there is a bullish divergence forming. We have a nice bullish divergence. So this may lead to more upside if we break past the 25.5 area. So we'll just have to see what happens there. But I anticipate more downside. I think that this could dip a little bit more for like 20. And then we'll see if we get some kind of break back up above 25.5. So I do think that the VIX might dip a little bit more. So I do think the market might go a little higher, causing that. But there's a bullish divergence. So even if we do dip to like 20, will we get some kind of breakout above 25 to start pushing higher? Is there about to be a pullback in the markets? We have a very, very big looking falling wedge, and the VIX is forming this divergence, which makes me a little concerned. The 10-year has an inverse head and shoulders, not the best of news. That sometimes could lead to downside. And the dollar index is also kind of flat here. We're going to be looking for a test of 101, so we'll see how that goes. So My view of the market is quite simple. I think that the market could go a little higher. So can Tesla. We could continue to uptrend. Tesla might pull back a little bit. I do think that 300 area is kind of tough resistance, and there's a very big bearish divergence here. So if it pulls back a bit, that's going to be fine. It might just pull back a couple of points, but then we could be looking for an attempt to push higher. We need to hold above 300. If we do hold that, I'm looking for like 310 as our target. So I'll be waiting to see what happens over the weekend with some potential trade deals, what happens with some China news, what happens with President Trump, and then my view could even change on Tesla in the markets. But for now, I do want to give you guys a warning about things. I'm cautiously optimistic about Tesla. I do think that if we dip, we could still try to push higher later on. But for SPY and the others, I am concerned that although this might try to push, the market may try to go a bit higher. There could be a bit of a pullback coming, looking at the VIX and different confluences. All right. So thank you all so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another update. Keep in mind that I'm not just going to blindly short the market out of nowhere. I need confirmation of a rejection and a pivot. We need to wait for confirmations. That's what you oftentimes have to do. You wait for the confirmation before doing anything. You don't just jump into positions. So I want to make that very clear, to be very careful with the way you play things. And I'll see you guys very soon with another update. Thank you for listening, guys. Have a good one, and peace out.